Hi, everybody. Welcome to Think BRICS, your compass for our multipolar world. Today, we've got another fantastic guest today returning to our program. His name is Professor Glenn Diesen. And for those who are not familiar with him, Glenn is a Norwegian political scientist and the professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. You can often find his contributions on his Substack YouTube channel and his podcast called the Greater Eurasia Podcast on Spotify, where he dives deep into his expertise into politics and international affairs. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. We're happy to always have you back. And I just want to talk to you about the most recent events last week. We have a lot to discuss here. So we saw that last weekend, the Vladimir Putin in Russia held the Victory Day celebration for the 80th anniversary of it at the Red Square, which, for those who are unaware, Victory Day is the celebration of the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi fascism and Nazi Germany. Out of the 29 leaders that attended the festival, we only saw two from the European Union, that is, Vucic of Serbia and Fico of Slovakia. And prior to this celebration against Nazi fascism, we saw many EU leaders decrying those attesting the parade and issued possible threats or sanctions on countries that attended. So, Professor Diesen, I want to ask, as a European citizen, do you think there's still a credible ruling class in Europe?
Well, just a quick comment. Serbia, though, they're not EU member yet. They're aspiring member, but probably won't get in anyways because of the Kosovo issue.
Mhm.
Well, I think there's a legitimacy crisis growing within the European Union. I think the source of it is simply because the European leaders aren't really responding to very basic national interests anymore. There is, for many reasons, call it concerns about living without America, so they tend to bend the knee a bit too often. Institutional conformity, you can call it ideology. Simply the need for the Europeans to always have this common denominator. It's very difficult to have any common decision making on anything. So there's a lot of reasons why they're not doing what they're supposed to. But anyways, as a result of a lot of problems, we see economic decline, see more social problems, political polarization, and in the vacuum left behind their failed policies, you see new political forces emerging, and of course, as we've also seen from France, where they now arrested the opposition leader, which is Le Pen, or in Romania, where they cancelled the election and then banned the one who actually won the election, Georgescu, from running. To Germany, where they now criminalized the largest and most popular political party, AfD. They effectively called it a non-extremist organization, which allows the intelligence agencies to begin to go after the main opposition. And this can be seen as a first step towards fully criminalizing it. So things aren't going well. And in terms of how they dealt with the ones pushing for negotiations and peace, it's nothing new. Keep in mind that Hungary, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, he traveled to Kiev to meet with Zelensky, then which is okay, that's permitted. But then he went to Moscow to also meet with Putin, so he can talk with both leaders and chart out the possibility for diplomacy in ending the war. He was punished by the EU, and he's seen now as being more or less rogue because he broke with the EU consensus, if you will. And the consensus now is formed by coercion. That is, you don't have diplomacy. Even when you see hundreds of thousands of men dying on the front line, you still don't talk to the opponent. So there's you see across the board the political leadership as well as the media losing a lot of credibility. Now the question is, what does the political leadership do when its legitimacy falls and collapses? And we see them essentially doubling down on preventing any opposition from emerging. So Europe, the path hasn't been charted yet completely, but we're walking down a very dangerous path, I would say.
You made a lot of really good points about, the elections, with the German with the German intelligence labeling the AfD as a far extremist party and prompted on banning them, to the issues that we're seeing in Romania. And I guess as just kind of a follow-up to that, do you kind of see these dominoes cascading to other EU countries too? And how far do you think? I guess, like you said, we don't know the path, but what do you think the path is for the EU right now?
Well, I think it's gonna begin to fragment at some point because the longer you hold you prevent the public will from asserting itself, the more dissatisfaction it causes. I mean, the thing is, in the past with Le Pen's party, you can simply ignore them and form coalitions, which doesn't include them. But now, of course, it's not really possible for political stability, given that they become too big. So the next step is you criminalize them and you use lawfare, and then but then of course if people know what's happening, and this creates a greater anger. You saw the same in Romania, by the way. They have election. Ceausescu wins the election, and then they just decide to cancel it based on allegations which prove to be fake or false. And what happens then? Are people going to bow their heads to the government and say, okay, you took our democracy away, we'll fall in line? No. You will see them becoming even more angry. And you can only do this for so long. If people believe that they can't change the status quo by peaceful means, then they might become more aggressive. And furthermore, when you have a political elite which is not seen as serving the people and is nonetheless not willing to step aside, people are willing to experiment more with radical alternatives. And I do think that some of the alternatives which are appearing in the vacuum now, they're not necessarily great, so don't necessarily have great solutions. I mean, you find some unsavory elements within the AfD in Germany, same as with Le Pen's party. So, just because they are the ones being hounded or censored doesn't mean or purged doesn't mean that they have all the answers. So it's we're setting ourselves up for a very, very difficult time ahead.
Yeah, you definitely hit the nail on the head when it comes to the public trust and the support right now going on in the EU, because quite frankly there are many citizens that are opposed to a lot of the EU policies, and as well as their actions with the war in Ukraine. But you see that with the European Commission going ahead with these ideas, and with people obviously as frustrated as they are from an economic and from a political perspective, not feeling like things have progressed in their way, they will go to more extreme ways to do so. And even though they join and like you said, even though these parties don't have all the answers, lumping everyone into this basket is another way, really, of just dismissing these guys' opinions just because it goes against right now what they are considering the mainstream or the norm. So, like we were talking, or like I was mentioning about Ukraine, because that is right now a very pivotal issue within the EU. There's been a lot of talk about the first direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine back in Istanbul. Right now, it's fair to say that the United States has had put some pressure on Zelensky, first coming in as trying to mediate, then saying that you guys are on your own. So what are your expectations about the first face-to-face meeting between Russia and Ukraine?
The first meeting?
Or I guess like the upcoming negotiations. I'm sorry.
Well, it's hard to say because I don't think they actually want. They don't actually want to end the war like this. I think both the Ukrainians and and the Europeans are looking at a way of pulling Trump and the Americans back into the war. So, in other words, set up negotiations which is destined to fail, and make sure that the blame falls on Russia. So, for example, the Europeans have set all these demands where we would need a ceasefire, but they don't want to discuss any of the political settlement. This has to come afterwards, which is which they know will cause apprehensions in Russia, because at the same time they're making it very clear that during this ceasefire, they will continue to pump weapons into Ukraine. They might even send troops into Ukraine. The British talked for a while about sending in fighter planes as well to control the skies. So they're already it's seen not as a actual solution, because also once you have a ceasefire, there's no pressure on the Europeans or the Ukrainians to accept any concessions. The only reason they're willing to talk now after 3 years is because the Ukrainian front lines are collapsing, and they need a pause to, a little bit like we did with Minsk between 2015 and 22. Things weren't going well, so got 7 years to rearm and then prepare for war. And I think this is what, why it won't actually work. Now, and I think this is the main division now. The Russians are saying very clearly, we want to have a political settlement and then we'll end the fighting. And the Europeans and the Ukrainians are saying, no, we have to end the fightings and then we'll talk. But again, there's no trust behind this. And at the end of the day, it's the Russians who sit on all of the cards here, because it's NATO and Ukraine which has lost the war. So the ability to dictate to the Russians, it doesn't really make that much sense. And that's a good example that we're now descended into theatrics. I think now this week the Europeans, they said we'll put an ultimatum on to Russia, 30 days unconditional ceasefire now, before we talk about any political settlement. And if you don't accept it, we'll do sanctions. And they want Americans to join in. And of course, the Russians say we're not going to accept an ultimatum, but then they counter it, saying let's meet instead in Istanbul, and we'll continue where we left off, because 3 years ago they were close to a deal before the British and the Americans came to sabotage the peace negotiations, and then of course Zelensky counters it, because he doesn't want this negotiation, so he counters it by saying, well, let's start the negotiations. I'm going to fly to Istanbul, and then Putin can meet me there. But this is, first of all, this makes sense. You can't organize a presidential meeting 2-3 days in advance. What would you talk about? How would you organize the security, especially given that it's a NATO country? And so it all looks like just a publicity stunt. He knows Putin's not going to start to fly down and just sit in front of the camera while he does whatever. They can't really. There's nothing they can agree on there. So it's not how negotiations are done. Usually you have a team, they negotiate, you come up with, you iron out all the details, and then when you close to the deal, then the head of state would come, you shake your hands and sign. So this is just, it's theatrics. So now, of course, Putin's not going to fly to Istanbul to meet with Zelensky. And then, of course, every European newspaper will have the headline, Ukraine wants peace, Russia does not, time for sanctions. So it's all, it's using the language of peace, but this is the objective here is just to continue the escalation, avoid any serious negotiations, and ideally, of course, pull the Americans back into the war.
Yeah, it's really interesting too what you were saying about with the previous Minsk agreements with the United States and the UK ending, basically canceling any progress in those negotiations. And like you were saying, that even though they came to an agreement, it was only really used as to build up Ukraine's military until the conflict resumed. What I find interesting, though, in this is now that we see Donald Trump as the president, and one thing he was constantly talking about is putting an end to the war in Ukraine. Obviously, he wasn't able to negotiate it and end peace in 24 hours like he so often claimed, but his attitude towards NATO and the EU is not as strong as previous administrations. So do you think that Donald Trump really wants peace between Russia and Ukraine here?
Well, that's a bit of an understatement to say he doesn't have the same support for the EU. In his own words, he said the EU was created to screw America. Again, that's his vulgar language, not mine. And of course, he sees also NATO as being somewhat outdated, given that it was a military alliance established after World War II to counter the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist. So again, it was now after the Cold War, it became an instrument to to cement America's position and create a hegemonic or collective hegemony in Europe. But Europe is not a priority for the United States, and the US is in relative decline. He has new priorities, have to go other places, and that means he has to pivot away from Europe. So there's a lot of reasons why he doesn't like neither the EU or NATO. The EU is seen as using, by the way, collective bargaining power to get very favorable trade agreements out of the United States. So, but yeah. Anyways, he has a lot of concerns about this, which is why he's pushing back. We can assign a lot of blame, if you will, to Trump's personality, but I think it's the wider. We focus too much on personalities. I think the wider shifts in international balance of power explains more. Again, the excessive commitment to Europe made sense in the bipolar and unipolar world order. In the multipolar, America has other places to go. I think just Trump reflects this, and I think whoever comes after him will at least, to lesser extent, nonetheless follow this path. Now, I do think that he genuinely wants an end to the war, but I'm not sure he knows how to do it. What he should have done if he wanted to end the war is immediately at the beginning just pull the United States out of this. But I think that his main mistake is the war has been lost already. So his main leverage is not with the Russians. The Russians are holding most of the cards. So he can't really pressure the Russians to do something which they consider to be an existential threat. Like they have, for the Russians, it's non-negotiable. There will be no NATO in Ukraine. They made this clear. In addition, they're not going to pull out of the territories which Ukraine lost, because this is seen as a guarantee. Whatever deal the Americans, Europeans, and Ukrainians sign, they can just walk away from it tomorrow, like they've done in the past. If they do so, at least then Russia has a favorable position to push back against Ukraine and NATO. So again, this is not siding with one or the other. This is just objective reality. This is seen as a guarantee. So no, I think that it's very difficult for Trump to meet Russian demands, because let's be honest, the Russian demands, they're quite demanding. It's a very tall order they're coming with. But that's the result of them actually winning the war. So in contrast, the Europeans and Americans and Ukrainians lost the war. So if he wants to mount a lot of pressure, he has a lot of pressure to mount on the Europeans and the Ukrainians. The Europeans depend on America for security, and Ukraine only survives because of American assistance. So that's the only place he can really put the pressure. It remains to be seen whether he's willing to do this or not. So he seems to be a bit uncertain. He's got Kellogg on one hand, which is effectively pursuing Zelensky's objectives, and then he has Witkoff, which is more recognized realities that no matter how much they might dislike it, is Russia, which will have a growing influence over dictating the outcome.
Yeah, and even with, I think one of the underlying points about these negotiations, or however they may be perceived, is that the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union in particular, they've been shown to back out of agreements, go against them, and not just in Ukraine, but it's just an example, and it just goes to show that when nations are negotiating in bad faith, it doesn't help the peace process whatsoever. It only goes to sow more distrust from the government and its citizens upon those breaking the treaty or breaking the agreement for their own gain. But I wanted to also shift to the more economic realm with Trump's negotiation tactics with his tariffs seeming to bite him right now. They recently came back from Geneva, Switzerland, where the United States and China agreed to decrease tariffs down 145% for the next 90 days. And to Trump's strategy, it seems like he can basically make any headline he wants. He can stir the news up, get everyone riled up, and for countries that are in a less that are not as nearly as powerful as the United States, they're going to have to capitulate. But with China and Russia, for example, they were able to wait out, and what we would call a sort of a common sense solution, something that a lot of people, had been anticipating for some time now. So, do you think this kind of lull, this cooling in United States and China tensions, do you think that'll last?
Well, maybe temporarily. I think Trump, in defense of Trump, because people often point out that his policies are very flawed, and by the way, they are very flawed, but they don't come out of nowhere. Everyone recognizes that the U.S. is in a difficult spot. It's the path it's on is not sustainable. Every year, they see more of its productive power going towards, China. They see China climbing up global value chains, outcompeting the Americans in technology, but also industry, and also U.S. debt is becoming unsustainable. It's looking as if it's going to go towards a crash, and in anticipation of this, China and others are coming up with alternatives. So unlike 2008 and 9, they're going to now have somewhere to run to avoid the big splash when the United States falls. So it's not looking good. So I think the Trump wants to reset somehow, reorganize the world economy to America's benefit. This being said, I don't think it's going about it the right way. Again, I think reindustrialization should be a key objective. I think the U.S. should invest in some industrial policies, both industrialize and also yeah, gain more competitiveness in key technologies. But tariffs can be an instrument towards this end. If you want to simply, let's say, put a 10% tariffs across the board and get more of a less national consensus that will have this for the next at least 20, 30 years to give some local industries competitive advantage over foreign industries. Well, even if this is the objective, then it has to have predictability to it, because if you're going to replace foreign imports, there has to be predictability. You need the local investors. Let's say you're going to make sneakers or clothing yourself. You need the factories. You need to train the workers. This takes a long time. And if you're going to make these investments, you want to make sure that the tariffs put ahead are predictable. But Trump, he makes it very clear he's using this only as negotiation tactics. So, would you make an investment now? Trump puts on 140% tariffs, removes it. What is he going to do tomorrow? What is he going to do in half an hour? Nobody knows. So, no one's. It's not a great industrial policy. It's merely using tariffs as a way of negotiating. And what the Chinese saw was that these were not sustainable for America. They're building up a lot of problems in their supply chains. There's going to be a lot of empty store shelves. So the Chinese decided to wait it out. Again, if your adversary is making a mistake, why interrupt him? And so they didn't respond that aggressively in retaliation, but they also didn't bend to Trump's pressure. So instead, they just sat by and wait until Trump had to change his mind, and Trump tries to mitigate some of the harm he caused, and of course, selling it to the public as a victory. But this is, as you said, he's excellent with the media, and he's got a very strong fan base, so he can take any piece of trash and sell it as gold. So it's he has a talent for that, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because the how he emerged to prominence in 2016 and the base he ran, because a lot of people are talking about his populist nature. The reindustrialization argument in particular has gained a lot of steam because of the effect that offshoring manufacturing to China has had on employment in areas like what we call the Rust Belt of the United States, i.e., kind of the Midwest and major manufacturing areas there. And like you were saying, Trump is trying to negotiate with the dollar, but all he's really doing with the dollar is making it so no one can trust the United States or the dollar.
Well, it's a bit like what he's trying to do with BRICS. He's telling the BRICS country, if you try to reduce dependence on the dollar, we're going to put 100% tariff. We're going to destroy your economy. It's it's like telling Iran if you develop long distance ballistic missiles for deterrence, we're going to bomb you. All you're doing is proving to the opponent that they need this. I mean, if you're threatening to weaponize all aspects of your economy, that is access to your technologies, to your industries, your transportation corridors, your banks, the dollar, every aspect of the economy is weaponized, and then you're telling the opponent, don't diversify from this weaponized economic connectivity, otherwise we'll weaponize it some more. I mean, it's this all or nothing approach. And some weaker countries will bend, like Colombia, Panama. Many will bow to America because they don't have any other alternatives, but they will wait until better alternatives come along, because they've learned a very powerful lesson now that you're not trading, you're not relying on the US economic system anymore because of trust. You're doing it because of coercion. And now, of course, if an alternative comes along, a lot of countries will jump on this. So you create a huge market now for whoever can come up with alternatives, and the Chinese certainly are. So all of this is going to fail. It's not. It's a very short-term fix. Which will cause some more long-term pain, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, it's doing is making a bigger and bigger group of people who don't want to negotiate or don't really want to trade with the United States, because when you weaponize your economy, and you have a zero-sum approach, really, sort of I need to win, and at your expense, even as something in a bilateral trade agreement, which I find so weird, is all you're doing is creating more animosity and unwillingness to invest in your economy because of the uncertainty that all of these crazy announcements and things like that have on investors and businesses. But yeah, to your point about China, Russia, and BRICS, it's interesting because now there's going to be there's an upcoming BRICS summit meeting in Rio de Janeiro in early July, now that Brazil has assumed the presidency or the secretaryship. And it really has been highlighted that Trump's tariffs are going to be a topic of discussion here. What do you see coming out of the summit in that regard?
Well, I don't think it's going to have, I guess, the same achievement as the last meeting in Kazan. So I do think that the Brazilians will probably drag their feet a little bit more. Also, there will be some caution. Well, again, with the American, it's on one hand they will create a demand for alternatives, but on the other side, there's also a concern that they don't want to step too much on America's toes at this critical time. So. I don't know. I don't have the highest expectations. I think BRICS still has a lot of challenges. Again, I think the key appeal is that it's very decentralized. It doesn't have the EU format, which centralizes everything. But this also makes it more difficult to come to to reach a consensus on key things. So I'm a bit. I'm still very optimistic. I'm extremely optimistic about BRICS. Actually, I just think it's going to be two steps forward, one step back every now and then. And again, I'm hoping there will be larger achievements. But again, some of the debates also have some similarities to what the Europeans were discussing in the 90s and 2000s. That is, do we go wider or deeper? Again, once you go wider, bring in countries like Indonesia, which is an incredible, I think an important country into such a powerful bloc. But it's also going to make it difficult to have more agreements on key issues. So yeah.
Yeah, like you're saying, because BRICS is a very decentralized mechanism, I agree that I don't really see much in terms of a kind of a joint statement or some kind of coordinated action that they're all going to be all going to be taking with the United States. It'll be something where each country is going to be negotiating with them bilaterally, and we've already seen that with how they're treating countries like China and how they're treating other countries in various regions of the world. I guess, like, for the sake of BRICS, how do you reconcile kind of the level of maybe economic disagreements within that forum itself? Because I think BRICS is labeled as this economic bloc against the United States, or that's kind of the way that it's being portrayed. But I think that that misses the forest through trees, where there's a lot of underlying dynamics with the BRICS nations themselves here.
Yeah, well, I think first to see it as anti-American would be also mistaken, because I think it would be better to consider to be anti-hegemonic. That is, if you define BRICS as anti-American, you would probably see from Brazil to India many countries being very apprehensive and cautious about continuing this down this path. But anti-hegemonic is very different. Now the difference is, if you're anti-American, you seek to, I guess, decouple completely from the Americans and marginalize its role in the international system. If you're anti-hegemonic, it's more you would want the opportunity to have to diversify, to have other. Yeah, all economic connectivity, again, from the industries, technologies, transportation corridors, banks, currencies, payment systems across the board. But that doesn't. That means one aspires for a more moderate role for the United States in the international system. That is, one among equals, not being dominant to the extent it is now. So I think that's one divisive issue, because some, of course, have more hostile relations with the U.S. than others. Of course, the decentralization. Some would like to see. For example, a common currency. The Indians have made it clear that's never going to happen. But also, it's worth noting that BRICS, they're not an alliance in terms of country A and B seeking to confront or necessarily collective advantage against country C. That is, no one really thinks that China and India are going to team up against America. It's just, it's not that kind of a club. Again, if you look at the EU or the European community after World War II, the purpose was, seeking security with other members. So the Germans and French wanting to improve relations with each other. I think you see the same within BRICS as well. It's they can't ally against anyone, because many of them consider each other the main, or at least one of the key opponents. So you see China and India, their opponents. They took in Ethiopia and Egypt, their opponents over the water. You have UAE and Iran. They also could end up in a situation of war. So you have so the main thought there is they want to use economic connectivity to overcome some of the political challenges and differences, which is I think that's admirable and is positive, because once you, again, what happened, for example, by comparison with the EU, is unlike after World War II, when they attempted to enhance security with other members. After the Cold War, they began to pursue security against non-members. I think once it takes on alliance format like this, like a bloc fighting against others, it would have then a counter reaction. It would be negative. So to the extent they look to use economic connectivity to improve relations among each other, I think it's a very, very positive development. But it also implies there's going to be internal divisions. The Indians will not be too comfortable in a common currency with the Chinese if it gives them too much power. But they will appreciate a BRIC system, which facilitates a multipolar system, so not too much power concentrates in China. And so there are a lot of meeting points, but there's also a lot of problems which has to be ironed out.
Yeah, there's a saying in China where it's when you get rich, I get rich, and it's kind of a kind of the epitome of how BRICS is facilitating this the economic plans, like you said, with connecting all these various economies to spur economic development and lessen inequality in these areas. But you made a really good point about how BRICS is adding enemy, what we call countries that are adversaries against each other, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Ethiopia, and everything like that. Which kind of leads me to my last question. Do you see a world where, like, the United States or the European Union joins BRICS?
I hope so, but this is because the NATO, as it is now, it's an alliance and it's a peacetime alliance. Now, the literature, is not lacking of scholars who warned against peacetime alliances because they perpetuate the need for conflict, and you see this is also an instrument for hegemony. So, if you're the United States, you want to dominate the world. it is the classic empire. You divide and rule, which is you go into Europe, you make sure that the continent remains divided. The Europeans depend on you for security, and the Russians are marginalized and contained. So, and it's the same in the Middle East. It's if peace will break out between the Gulf states and Iran, then you don't have partners anymore to contain the Iranians, and the Arabic states will be, or the Gulf states will be much less obedient. That is because without the security dependence, they won't be as economically and politically loyal. And of course, you have the same in Asia. So, so when you're an empire, you do depend on perpetuating tensions and conflicts. So this was one of the goals towards the end of the Cold War. How can we transition out of this bloc politics into an inclusive system where we seek to facilitate positive sum security? Now, I think that BRICS has this potential, and indeed, given that it takes in adversarial states, it is a very good indication of this. Now, I think, we failed to do this in Europe after the Cold War. We had agreements for an inclusive European security architecture, but the lure of hegemony is quite attractive. So, and this is why we abandoned the agreements we had for an inclusive pan-European security institution. Instead, we went with NATO expansion, which was the manifestation of the aspiration for collective hegemony. So we kind of threw away our possibilities there. Now, obviously, we failed. Hegemony is falling apart. So this is a good time to look towards multipolar solutions, an inclusive security system and economic architecture. So towards this end, I think BRICS is excellent, and I would like to see if the Western countries could join into this. It would be a way of transitioning away from this confrontational zero-sum block politics and looking towards a more sustainable, benign form of organizing the international system. So it's no, I hope so, but I don't see it yet. Again, it's but yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, and yeah, that's so that's going to conclude today's discussion. I want to thank Professor Glenn Diesen again for being on our channel, Think BRICS. Our viewers are always really eager to have you back on and listen to your thoughts and analysis, especially on today's. And hopefully, next time we talk, we could talk about like the Greater Eurasian Initiative and kind of the idea of NATO and how those factors have kind of played into. Glenn, is there anywhere else that I did not include that they can follow your content online?
So yeah, that's becoming my main channel now, I guess.
Right. Yeah, you have a lot of really awesome interviews in there. So I really invite everyone to read your Substack, listen to your podcast, even watch the videos too, just to get a real 360 view of everything going on in today's tumultuous and volatile world. But it was always great to hear your insights, Glenn, and I really want to thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Ben.